Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Spence, and I'm moderating the panel on building awareness and galvanizing the public. We have a very energetic and I would say inspiring panel. And I think they're going to provoke some discussion today, perhaps even a bit of controversy, who knows. So let's start by setting the context for what we're talking about with this panel titled Building Awareness and Galvanizing the Public. So before lunch, we heard from our first panel, and we heard some really fascinating and informative discussions around these special places, around how, in particular, we can protect these places, we can design these places, how these places adapt, how we can strengthen these special places, especially our urban landscapes. And in this session, we're going to shift the focus a little bit. We're going to really start talking about the power of people and why public engagement matters. How can we engage with people so that they are part of the solution to some of these challenges, some of these land management challenges, whether as voters, as volunteers, as activists, and as future stewards of these lands as well. And how can we engage with them in a way that makes these cultural landscapes and these parks and these special places that we really love, how can we engage with them in a way that makes these places relevant and of service, not just to existing visitors, but to new audiences and new communities, not just some of our communities? And finally, what are some of the myths and challenges that we face in designing and protecting and preserving these landscapes? And what success stories and best practices do we have to share? So firstly, I'm going to talk just very briefly about why engagement matters. We probably all know this intuitively, but I do want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's important. And there are a whole range of reasons why it's important to engage with our communities, to engage with the public. Two obvious ones. Firstly, research and common sense suggests that political support for parks is tied to park visitation and use. Political support can affect direct funding for these special places because we know that politicians tend to listen a little bit more when the public has a strong feeling or a strong sentiment about an issue. And yet, we actually face a challenge here because many of these cultural landscapes, many of these special places face declining or static use. This isn't the case for every place, but it is certainly a theme across the US. Which raises the question, who is currently using our parks? Who's currently using these cultural landscapes and these special places? So I have a bit of a question for the audience. Raise your hand if you think that current users of these type of places roughly mirror our population, our demography. Okay, you guys have guessed this was a trick question. Okay, who thinks that park users are not keeping pace and a change in park users is not keeping pace with our rapidly diversifying population? Anyone? You guys nailed it. You're quite right. I'll use a couple of examples. Now, I would preface that by saying that some of these places, some of these parks, do not fit this and are used more widely. But here's a couple of statistics that I found really interesting. This was a study of national parks recently. It found that 78% of park users identified themselves as non-Hispanic whites. That correlates to about 65% of the general population at the time this study was taken. And then another very interesting statistic here, that non-Hispanic whites are roughly twice as likely to have visited a national park in the past 2 years than Hispanics or African Americans. And that's important. I think this demographic issue, this demographic challenge, is another very important reason for us to be engaging with the public and with the entire community. Because our parks and our public places should be for everyone. And I think if we care about our public lands, if we care about preserving these special places, then we need to make sure that they are being visited, that they are being valued, that they're being used, that they're being stewarded, and they're being supported by everyone, by all communities, not just the traditional users, important though they are. And it raises challenges for us. It raises challenges of access. It raises challenges of equity. it also raises challenges but also opportunities around how do we respond to technological advances and technological opportunities. And I would say that our urban landscapes have a really special role to play because these are the places where people live. These are the places where we can reach new audiences more easily and more effectively than anywhere else. So the next question, I think we've kind of talked a little bit about why we should engage and why that's important, and that's probably the easy part. I think the hard part is how do we engage? How do we engage with the public effectively, including new communities, including audiences and people that may not have benefited from or used these special places in the past? And how do we make these places relevant and of service to these people? So that's really what our panel's here to discuss today. Our speakers are going to give us some really interesting and very distinct examples about how parks and cultural landscapes can be used to serve people in different ways, in new ways, in exciting ways as well. They're going to identify some best practice. They're going to highlight some of their own personal and professional experiences and maybe even shatter a few myths and perceptions along the way. So I'm just going to give you a very quick example, and you're going to hear more about this later. This is an example from my own organization, the Institute of the Golden Gate. And for those of you who don't know very much about the Institute, we're a part of the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're a non-profit partner of the National Park Service. And our mission is really around how do we position cultural landscapes and parks and public lands as part of solutions to these big societal challenges like, what role can these special places play in helping us adapt to and combat climate change? How do they help us address rapid urban development? And also, how can they help us address and deal with our healthcare crisis, the Healthy Parks, Healthy People movement? That's been our biggest initiative at the Institute. And for the past 3 years, we've been playing a role as a kind of backbone or support organization, both here in the Bay Area and at a national level with a national coalition of park and landscape groups, but also health groups. And it's been a really unique and a very humbling experience. And what we're seeing now is that we're starting to see policy and practice emerge that has the potential to position parks as a key health intervention, both a health treatment and health prevention tool. And that has the potential to have an impact on millions of lives, and especially people with high health needs. Those people also are often people who have rarely, if ever, used our parks or these special cultural landscapes. So you'll hear a little bit more about this later. But now I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker. Actually, I can't think of anyone more fitted to be talking about this issue. She has a background in community organizing and in social and environmental justice movement. She's been a colleague of mine for the past 3 years. She's the program director at the Institute. She's been leading our Healthy Parks, Healthy People work. And she's going to talk about the core principles of community engagement and some of the challenges and opportunities for any of us in the landscape and parks world to benefit from. Her name's Kristin Wheeler, and she's the program director at the Institute of the Golden Gate. So welcome on up, Kristin.
So as Chris mentioned, I'm the program director at the Institute of the Golden Gate, which means that I get to work with doctors, rangers, landscape architects, community leaders, pastors, you name it. I get to work with everybody and bring them together to really figure out how we can better position parks and public lands to solve some of the biggest environmental and societal challenges we face today. So it's a pretty humbling and phenomenal job. So before we get started, if everybody could please put everything down in your hands, stand up. So the best way to start talking about community engagement is to learn where it starts from. So if everybody could fold at the waist from the grassroots all the way down. As we build our communities and build up, we have the potential to impact the grass tops as well. And introduce the person next to you to your left. Say hello. To the right. Excellent. Right. So, I think everybody in this room probably knows this, but nature and cultural landscapes, our parks, our beautiful spaces, are here to help our communities improve our mental and physical well-being, heal and restore our communities, which now we need more than ever with the race and politics issues affecting communities across the country. They help us build more resilient communities. And I mean that in the sense of not only as adaptation and mitigation against climate change, but really as our common core. They help provide social cohesion for our communities, give us a sense of place, something to build off of, something to increase positive outdoor experiences in their memory. I know when I think back to every memory I have as a child, it actually doesn't involve sitting in a room like this. It involves being outside in places like that. It helps us to learn and inspire and ultimately to thrive. And I'm sure we could spend the rest of the afternoon coming up with a list of what our cultural landscapes and our parks actually do for our communities. So if you build these beautiful, wild, natural landscapes, these beautiful parks, they might not come. I think back in the days when we could build those fields, people could come to them. But things are changing. Our population is rapidly shifting and changing, and for the better. And it's time that our traditional ways of building landscapes and parks shifts with it, or they will not exist, nor will our communities thrive from them anymore. So I'm going to try to break down the steps of community engagement, and this is coming from not just the environmental and parks world, but actually building in the success of community engagement from our social justice movements, from our environmental justice movements, from our LGBTQ justice movements happening across the country, because they've gotten it right, and I think that we have something to learn from them. So before you even start a community engagement effort, there are a couple of tips to keep in mind. Be clear about the purpose or the goals and the communities or populations. You might be able to sit around your board table and have a really good idea of what it is that you're providing for a community. But if you leave that conference table and you enter into a community, does it translate? Is it clear? Is it transparent? What community are you actually working to engage? How can you actually define that? Become knowledgeable about the community. And this is a really interesting point that's changed in the last 10 years, and that shift has actually started here in San Francisco, a hub of innovation, as we all know. Back in the day, community organizers and people who were involved in the community engagement sector used something called cultural competency. We figured we should know every single thing about every single culture. That was the most respectful and the best way to do it. Well, luckily, somebody thought, there's no way we can learn every single thing about every single culture. So there's a new term, it's called cultural humility. Who here has heard it or used it? Great, all right. So it was actually started by someone in the healthcare field here in San Francisco. I encourage you to look into it a little bit more, but essentially says, if we're respectful and we bring self-humility to it, that's as good as we can do. And that's okay. You don't have to know everything about every culture that you're trying to serve or provide a park or cultural landscape for. But you do have to go into those conversations with respect and a little bit of humility and be okay saying, hey, I don't actually get that. Explain to me what it is that you want to do. Explain to me what recreation looks like to you. What is a perfect Sunday in an outside space for you? Why aren't you spending time here? And for engagement to occur, it's necessary to establish those relationships, build trust, and to seek commitment. To make sure that you're building that trust from day one is extremely important. And a couple examples for this, we were launching into a park prescriptions program here in San Francisco, working with our public health providers at San Francisco Department of Public Health, working in the Bayview Hunters Point community. And when you look at me, you wouldn't necessarily think, yeah, she grew up in Bayview, I can definitely tell. Well, I didn't. And this was a hard thing for us to actually talk about. And it's a very uncomfortable subject sometimes to talk about going into communities. So we have to make sure that we're approaching it with grace, humility, and we're not the bull in the china shop. Remember and accept that introducing an agenda into a community does not make it of the community. You may have an agenda at the top of your list. You may get commitment and build trust from them. They may tell you what they want to see in their backyard or across town or 3 cities away, but it doesn't necessarily make you of that community, and that's totally fine as long as you're transparent about it. This picture at the bottom is a couple of our new friends over in Oakland at Children's Hospital. So they're pediatricians, they're providers, they work on the front lines with homeless shelters and foster youth. And we knew that we wanted to work with them immediately to encourage their populations to spend time outside. It took about 3 years of conversations. It took many, many opportunities to learn from one another about what is the language that we use together. The number one rule we used from day one was we cannot use acronyms and jargon, which is very helpful. And a lot of it was actually just spending time in the clinics with them and volunteering and having no agenda and sitting in the corner and listening and finding out and learning and absorbing what the needs are of those communities. And through that, we were able to actually determine and provide park programming now that is used. Those buses are filled every single week, I will tell you that, bringing out foster youth and bringing out homeless families to the parks for them to get what they need. And what they needed was an hour and a half of peace and restoration. These single mothers said, I don't care, I just need some time alone. So we said, okay, we will essentially provide childcare in the parks for you so you can have some peace and restoration. And that's what they wanted, and that's what they wanted to see from their cultural landscape. For engagement to succeed, here are all the answers, right? Partnering with the community is necessary to create change. You will not see long-term commitments and change unless you partner with the community. All aspects must be recognized and must respect community diversity. So our communities are built up of many different microcosms. There's no one website, there's no one answer, there's no one person that holds every single piece in a community. It takes learning about the faith-based community. It takes figuring out who the community leader is. It takes figuring out which coffee shop the decisions are getting made in, because ultimately I found that at the end of the day, decisions usually don't get made in a boardroom, they're getting made in coffee shops or down the street or conversations on the block. Be flexible enough to change the meeting needs of the community. And I think that this point is even more important when we're talking about building these spaces that are meant to last forever. We have wonderful examples around the Bay Area here on how that's happened. Here in the Presidio alone, we're in a building that's completely changed over to meet the needs of what people are wanting. And we have an amazing opportunity coming up with the new Presidio Parklands project to create something that can last and be ready to shift and be dynamic, because our communities are changing faster and faster and for the better. Community collaboration requires long-term commitment. You cannot go in, it is a process, it is not a project. So we look at building our parks and creating these beautiful cultural landscapes as deadlines and time-bound, and we have to get it done, and we're all upset, I'm sure, that Caltrans isn't working faster and we want this park right now. But the community engagement piece has to start earlier. There can be no deadline. It has to be an ongoing process. That flow of communication has to be two-way, and we have to make sure that we are adapting and changing to those changing populations. So, key lessons. Listen. There's a rule that was made many centuries ago, the 80-20 rule. You should spend 80% of your time listening and 20% of your time asking questions. This will lead to greater trust, it will lead to much better outcomes and much quicker change. Practice humility. It's okay not to know every single thing about the community you want to serve, you think should be involved in a project. Ask questions and listen, and eventually you will learn, and just bring a little bit of self-humility to it. It goes a long way. And it is a process, not a project. Things are always time-bound, especially when it comes to working with together and human populations. Thank you.
So we've heard about why public engagement matters and community engagement matters, and we've heard some of the principles and some of the techniques, from listening to exercising humility to value of curiosity. We've learned some ways that we can go about engaging and being of value with these places in new ways to new audiences, whether it's offering these places as health resources. And now we're going to hear about another way that we can make these special places of value to new audiences and new communities, and particularly young people. Our next two speakers are staff members from the award-winning Crissy Field Center, which serves youth from across the city of San Francisco. They also participated in these programs as young people, so they have a fascinating story to tell us about youth engagement and empowerment. So I'd like to invite up Jessica Chen and Gilda Ramirez to tell us about their experiences.
So I'm Jessica. This is Gilda. As Chris introduced us, we are both staff members at the Crissy Field Center and also past participants of the youth programs that exist at this center. For those of you who are not familiar with the Crissy Field Center, the Crissy Field Center is a dynamic youth environmental center located in the Golden Gate National Parks. We'll share with you how this center has been really instrumental and successful in engaging and also empowering our local youth to not only just be stewards of the parks and the environment, but to also be stewards and leaders in their own communities. So first, just a brief history about the area, Crissy Field. Initially, the Ohlone Indians inhabited this area here before there were settlers. Over time, it was an army base. It was also at one point a Grand Prix racetrack. As you can see on the left side, it used to be an airfield for the U.S. Army. The Army handed over this entire Presidio area to the National Park Service. So for the next few years, there was really intense restoration efforts, lots of volunteers, thousands of volunteers, and also thousands of donations that came pouring in to help restore this area back to its original marshland. So as you can see on the right, it's a nice grassy field and also a nice reconstructed marsh. In 2001, that is when the Crissy Field Center opened. It was also the same year that the Crissy Field Park was opened to the public. So I actually started at the Crissy Field Center when I was 15 years old. This is currently our temporary location as they build the Doyle Drive up to the bridge. Now, that same year when the center opened, it used to be a military commissary. It was established with one major goal in mind, and that was to offer relevant, multicultural, environmental education that would inspire the young people to lead positive changes in their national parks and in their communities and also in their lives. So over the next 14 years, the programming at the center has literally exploded. If I can give you a sense of the energy that occurs every day at the center, it's literally a very busy honeybee hive. Multiple hundreds of people coming in and out, lots of young people. And I'll give you a quick overview of our mission and the programs that we do offer at the center. So these are just some of the components of our theory of change. One of the important ones is that we need to invest in the needs of the young people in a park setting. So investing in the sense of not just providing them a space, a natural space, but providing them with opportunities, whether it's internships, opportunities for learning, opportunities for growth, opportunities to be leaders in their communities. 2, to strengthen relationships with parks, communities, and each other. So really using this place as a platform and space for that. Number 3, to be youth leaders who drive positive impacts in parks and the environment. So it's not just about being passive participants, so just coming just one time to maybe help with the restoration projects, but really create meaningful roles, meaningful long-term roles, where our youth can really contribute to the overall growth and the preservation of this environment. So every year, I believe that the amount of youth that we serve grows exponentially. Roughly about last year, we served 20,000 youth. Park-wide, it's about 60,000. From our 10-year report, which came out in 2011, we provided over, I believe, 1.5 million contact hours to youth and their families in the Bay Area. So just to give you an idea, the Crissy Field Center, we have a core number of 20 staff. We cannot do this work alone. Just as Kristin mentioned and Sarah mentioned, community engagement is really crucial. We have over 135 partners, and it's constantly growing every year. It's with local schools, it's with community-based organizations. Our idea is that no one should be excluded in the environmental movement, that there's still traditional thoughts and roles of how the environment plays for young people, but young people are starting to redefine that role and redefine what the environment means. So again, our success is also the result of just really visionary individuals who donated money and also generous foundations, but it's also the energetic volunteers, the interns, the staff members, all of our partners. It's really about the collective work and the support that's benefited the center's young students over the years. It's also the youthful voices who bring diversity and vitality to many of our programs that makes it the true meaning of Parks for All Forever. That is our motto at the Conservancy, and I think we're definitely a living example of that. And There's also the idea of collective impact. Collective impact in the sense that large-scale social change requires broad cross-sector coordination. So not to, again, just do the work individually as organizations, but we need to go across, reach out to the health field, reach out to the art field, reach out to the education field, and really work collectively together on the same boat, so that way we can really accomplish and also succeed in providing these services and providing that change that is required. So I'll give you a brief overview of the many programs that come out of the center. We primarily serve the population of K through 12. We also provide opportunities for college interns. As you can see on the left, we are a partnership between the National Park Service, so we work a lot with the National Park Service Rangers, and also with the Presidio Trust. So we provide, one way we reach youth is through school field trip programs. So we actually provide full-on lessons where we will bring youth from their communities out to the center, and for those who have barriers to transportation, we do provide transportation, charter buses, bring them out. There are also pre-lessons, so that way our youth are familiar with the environments before they come on the trip. So there are school field trips, primarily for the elementary school age. We also provide a full-on summer camp for the same age group, where either they get to explore the different national parks on the site, they get to learn more about the animals that inhabit the park. We also have a full-fledged middle school program. It's called the Urban Trailblazers program. That's them in the right side with the waders actually going into the marsh. Typically, it's illegal to step into the marsh, but they get an education pass. But part of that is that hands-on experience. I think for a lot of young people, when they go to a park, they feel there's a lot of restrictions, things that they cannot do. There's too many rules. You have to be quiet at a certain time. You can't be too noisy. So just the opportunity just to jump into a marsh is very memorable for a lot of our youth. Other programs, we also serve high school. One of the exciting programs that we do is that we partner with a local high school here, Galileo, which is less than a mile away. We work with their AP Environmental Science courses for on-site classroom experiences. So the students actually come out, get field experience. They may do some water quality testing at Lobos Creek or in the marsh. Another exciting program that we do is community programs. So for programs who maybe aren't able to come out here, our rangers and our staff will actually go on site, so whether to their school or to their community center, and provide even something as simple as a campfire program, roasting marshmallows, or even building a tent, just to provide that experience in their own community and own setting. Another exciting program that we do provide is the Camping at the Presidio program. That was actually developed and driven by the community members. There was a survey done years ago asking the community, so what is it that you would like to see? What is it that you want from the park? And a lot of the educators said, we would really love a place to camp that's close by, and also really love the opportunity to learn how to camp. As you know, if you grow up in San Francisco, there aren't too many places to camp immediately in the city. It requires a lot of money for transportation, a lot of skill in the sense that you have to have some type of experience hiking, building tents, building campfires. So every year, we actually train educators first to come out, so they get familiar with the sites. We provide all camping supplies, tents, sleeping bags. That way they can bring their own classrooms and lead their own programs with their youth. I'm just gonna quickly go over youth leadership. So I kind of saved the last program at the center for last. Might be a little biased, but the reason why I saved it last is because Gilder and I were actually past participants in high school in the youth leadership program. It's the Inspiring Young Emerging Leaders. It actually came out from the Youth Advisory Council, which I was a part of when I was 15. So the whole vision, the whole thought about Inspiring Young Emerging Leaders was to provide a program for the youth who were not familiar with parks, who have no experience with parks, but an introduction to this place where we can learn about all different types of social issues that are happening, and to be able to create projects every year that we select as a team Just quickly, this is our framework. We believe in this ladder of learning and also ladder of opportunity framework where youth can enter this ladder at any age and any stage. As you can see, the overview of the programs, we outreach to youth in different types of ways. And eventually the thought is that these youth will one day become the leaders and professionals who actually work in the park, who are going to design programming, who are going to create programming, who are going to represent the community that they serve. Unfortunately, Gilder and I are just two of many examples of those leaders and professionals who are working today in the park. Those are pictures of Gilder and I when we were in high school. We have also had the amazing opportunity this past November to go with a lot of our leaders of the park, with Michael from the Trust, Chris, Greg, Kristin from the Conservancy, and Frank from the National Park Service to go to the World Parks Congress in Sydney, Australia, and serve as the global youth ambassadors and to speak on behalf of not just our youth, but youth all over the world in terms of what we would like to see in the parks, in preserving the parks, and our role in the parks. So right now, Gilder will share a little bit of his presentation that he provided at the World Parks Congress, and he'll give you an idea, a better idea as to why empowerment is really crucial when it comes to community engagement, and that you can't just engage young people or the community, but it's that crucial step of empowerment.
I'm gonna try to do this in 90 seconds, all right? So if there's one image that I want you to take out from today, is this word, gutter rainbows, but there's also this image. A lot of times, where me and Jess grew up in the Mission District, there's a lot of houses that are pretty tall. There's gonna be buildings, there's gonna be buses that are roaring by. When you walk outside, sometimes you're gonna walk into crunchy glass, and sometimes you'll see these brilliant colors coming out of a corner or coming out of the street. And I like to bring this image because I think a lot of times we forget that there are people that aren't accessing these parks, people that live by maybe gutter rainbows, maybe that's where all they see colors is from the streets, and maybe they don't enjoy them coming from a different park or different field or anywhere else except for on the ground. So if there's any image that sticks with you from today, I want it to be that one, to not forget about those kids. And really, I think this is a really good opportunity to just remember that in order for kids like me, the reason why I came into this is because there was an opportunity offered to me as a high school student. To me, it didn't matter to me about parks, it didn't matter to me about the environment. What mattered to me was that my mom was working on her own, trying to raise us, and I needed a way to get money to help contribute to her. So there was opportunity in the program that was brought to me for us to go there and to be a part of this program where we learned about environmental issues, where we had leadership training, and we learned how to be a part of this world that's not traditionally, we're not supposed to be a part of it. And that's me when I was in high school. I look pretty similar, but it's a long time ago. We were juggling that idea of what an environmentalist is, and on our shirts we would have something that was stereotypically that went against that. So I think mine said I love hip hop, somebody said I eat pepperoni pizza, some people said I eat ribs. So it's things that you traditionally wouldn't think of an environmentalist, but we felt empowered because we got to put this project on where we got to go to the Grand Canyon and we got to see what that was like. And we put all that together, and we were able to also come up with a video and a movie where we showed and we played with that word, environmentalist, and what it actually means. And so that gave me ownership. That made me feel like I could be a part of this even when I grow up. And it was because they had the understanding of hiring people that understood my language, that ate pepperoni pizza. We watched Niner games. I understand that. I understand that language. And so that felt really comforting. So I would say to this group of people, understanding is super, super important, because you can't just build anything and expect people to come. You need to make sure that there is an understanding in speaking with those people, or having people that you want to work, that are working in that park, help bring the next generation of people. If your staff is colorful, then the next generation of kids that are going to be participating in it are going to be very colorful too. And that's really, really important. And the last thing, just an image of that gutter rainbow, is it's really, really great to work with young people. Young people, it's an awesome thing. Some people are like, oh, you work with middle school students? That must be so hard. Like, no, they're so great. They're like the underdog of all the kids. Everybody thinks that they're the ones that like behave the worst, but they're really, really great, and they're really, really good, young, smart people. And everybody looks for the fountain of youth, and I'm gonna telling you right now, if you want to stay young, work with young people. They're gonna keep you energized. And if you have kids that are coming in with staff that have already been a part of it, me and Jess, we're getting started. We're not tired. We want to keep on doing projects like this where we're involving more kids that don't traditionally get to be here. So let's start talking to our kids. Let's get young, right? Let's start speaking to our young people because they got a lot to say and we got a lot to listen to.